The pirate, who once ruled the Caribbean with cannon fire and terror, did not die in battle, but on a crowded execution block, where a single swing of the axe severed his head before thousands of cheering spectators, proving that every black flag, every stolen treasure, and every impossible escape ultimately led to the same unforgettable ending beneath the relentless justice of the British Empire. Enjoy the video and don't forget to subscribe. Picture the year 1722. Stand upon the damp oak planks of an English colonial harbor before sunrise and breathe the heavy scent of Atlantic salt, boiling pine tar, wet hemp rope, stale gunpowder, and bilge water rising from merchant ships, rocking gently against weathered piers. The sharp crack of snapping canvas echoes across the anchorage, while iron anchor chains scrape against rough timber, producing a sound every sailor immediately recognizes. Yet this morning the harbor is unusually crowded because hundreds of civilians, merchants, naval officers, and ordinary laborers have gathered for a spectacle rather than trade. They have come to witness the execution of a pirate whose raids once spread terror across the Atlantic shipping lanes. Only a few years earlier, he commanded a swift sloop of nearly 90 tons, built with overlapping oak futtocks, fastened by hand-forged iron spikes, and protected below the waterline with thick coats of heated pine tar forced into every seam, packed with twisted oakum. Her shallow draft allowed escape through narrow channels where larger naval frigates risked tearing open their keels upon hidden sandbanks. Under black canvas, stained by smoke and salt, the crew lived according to strict articles of agreement, dividing plunder by carefully measured shares, while every captured merchant captain feared the moment the black flag appeared above the horizon. That freedom ended when relentless Royal Navy patrols slowly closed every escape route, turning one of the Caribbean's most feared pirates into a condemned prisoner whose final walk toward the execution block would become a warning remembered for generations. The condemned pirate emerged from the stone prison shortly after sunrise, with heavy iron shackles locked around his wrists and ankles, each link forged thick enough to prevent even the strongest sailor from breaking free. A detachment of red-coated soldiers surrounded him with loaded flintlock muskets fitted with polished socket bayonets nearly 17 inches long, their officers fully aware that pirate rescues had been attempted before. The slow march wound through narrow streets lined with warehouses built from heavy oak beams blackened by decades of sea air, where every window, rooftop, and balcony overflowed with spectators eager to witness justice. Some shouted insults, while others laughed and pointed toward the prisoner, remembering stories of burned merchant ships, stolen cargoes, and terrified captains forced to surrender beneath the threat of broadside cannon fire. The pirate himself walked in silence despite the weight of the chains rubbing raw against his skin with every step. Ahead stood the execution platform, constructed from massive oak timbers driven together with iron spikes capable of supporting thousands of pounds. Beside the block rested the executioner's axe, its broad steel blade freshly sharpened until the edge reflected the pale morning light. A bucket of clean water, coarse cloths, and fresh straw had already been placed nearby, because experienced executioners understood that precision, preparation, and a razor-sharp blade determined whether death came swiftly or required additional blows before the cheering crowd. Before the sentence was carried out, the court clerk unfolded the official warrant and read every charge in a loud, steady voice so the entire square could hear. The pirate stood accused of armed robbery upon the high seas, unlawful seizure of merchant vessels, destruction of valuable cargo, and the murder of sailors who resisted surrender. Under British maritime law, Piracy was considered an assault upon the crown itself, making execution almost inevitable once guilt had been established. Witnesses described captured brigs stripped of food, gunpowder, sailcloth, and navigational instruments before their hulls were abandoned to wind and tide. The prisoner's former sloop had carried several bronze cannon cast from an alloy containing roughly 88% copper and 10% tin, weapons weighing hundreds of pounds each and secured by thick breeching ropes twisted from durable hemp. Their charges relied upon carefully measured black powder composed primarily of potassium nitrate, charcoal, and sulfur. When ignited by a glowing ember passing through the touch hole, the powder expanded violently into superheated gas, launching iron shot that smashed through oak planking, tearing long splinters from the inner hull with enough force to wound or kill sailors standing several feet away. Every detail reminded the crowd why the authorities intended this execution to become a lesson remembered long after the pirate's name disappeared from history. The executioner stepped forward, wearing a heavy leather apron stained by years of grim work, and carefully examined the prisoner's position before guiding him toward the block. The pirate removed his hat without being ordered, knelt upon the rough platform, and rested his neck against deeply scarred oak that bore countless cuts from earlier executions. Silence settled across the square, as even the restless gulls seemed drowned beneath the tension. The executioner tested his footing, tightened both hands around the long ash handle, and slowly raised the axe above his shoulder. Its hardened steel blade flashed beneath the morning sun, while every spectator fixed their eyes upon the condemned man. Then the weapon descended with overwhelming speed, driven not only by muscular force, but by gravity, acting upon the heavy head. The impact split flesh and bone in a single violent motion before striking the execution block hard enough to leave a fresh groove beside older scars carved by previous blows. For a heartbeat, the crowd remained frozen, and then thousands erupted into deafening cheers. Hats flew into the air, soldiers smiled openly, church bells rang across the harbor, and merchants applauded as another pirate who had once ruled the sea disappeared forever beneath the authority of the British Crown. Death did not end the punishment. Officials immediately lifted the severed head by the hair and displayed it before the roaring crowd as unmistakable proof that the sentence had been carried out. The body was searched, identified, and prepared for public display, rather than a dignified burial. Throughout the Golden Age of Piracy, the authorities understood that fear could discourage crime more effectively than written laws, so executions became carefully staged demonstrations of royal power. In many ports, the remains of notorious pirates were suspended inside iron gibbets, forged from heavy-wrought bars shaped to hold the corpse upright, while wind, rain, and salt slowly consumed it over months or even years. Passing sailors could see the dark silhouette from approaching ships long before reaching the harbor, a warning visible against the horizon. Every creaking movement of the iron cage reminded arriving crews of the price awaiting anyone who accepted pirate articles of agreement or raised a black flag against the Empire. The smell of decay drifting across the water became as deliberate a message as the gibbet itself, ensuring that justice remained visible long after the cheering crowd had returned home, and the execution platform stood empty once again. News of the beheading spread across the Atlantic with remarkable speed aboard merchant convoys, Royal Navy frigates, fishing vessels, and coastal packets. Captains repeated the story in crowded taverns, shipyards, and distant ports until it became part of maritime legend. Many young sailors who had once dreamed of easy riches beneath the black flag now understood the reality behind pirate life. The promise of gold, captured cargo, and freedom from naval discipline almost always ended with relentless pursuit, starvation, disease, betrayal, imprisonment, and finally public execution before thousands of spectators. The cheering crowd had celebrated far more than the death of one criminal. It celebrated the restoration of secure trade routes upon which entire colonies depended. Every swinging gibbet, every displayed skull, and every public execution reinforced the same unmistakable lesson. A pirate might command a fast sloop, fire devastating broadsides, and terrorize the seas for years, but once captured by the expanding power of the British Empire, neither courage, reputation, nor stolen treasure could prevent the final walk to the execution block, where the roar of the crowd became the last sound many of history's most feared pirates ever heard.